hello and welcome to Elaine's Literary Salon. My name is Jeffrey James Higgins. My wife Cynthia's in my restaurant. We've turned it into a literary hub for the DC area. And I think you're number 155 in our author interviews since we've been here, so I'm excited to have you.
I love that because my novel set in 1955. Memphis is
creepy.
Karmic.
See how all that comes together? That's fantastic. So we have elainesliterarysalon.com. If you would, please check us out online. You can see our upcoming events. We have weekly events, sometimes 2, 3, or 4 a week. And our podcast, Elaine's Literary Salon, is number 4 on Apple and number 3 on Spotify as of now. We'll see when this comes out. So I'm excited today to have Thomas Dann with us. Tom was born and bred in Memphis, Tennessee, 5 generations deep in a family fighting the entrenched political machine there that then became part of it. I got to hear the backstory of that, how that happened. He spent time variously between the East and Left Coast, studying creative writing at Stanford, working for years as a felony defense investigator for the Washington, D.C. public defender, then lawyer, company builder, and writer. You're a real slouch, Tom, aren't you? All the while wondering what he wants to do when he grows up. He now lives across the river in Chevy Chase, Maryland with his wife, Melissa, and they have 4 children, and he loves the blues. Midnight in Memphis is Tom's debut novel. The book has received strong reviews from the Southern Review of Books and others, and it was just selected by the New York Times for its short list of mystery novels to buy for Christmas. So now that you know that, what to do, do it. Okay. Tom, that's a big deal, by the way, your book getting selected as a Christmas recommendation. How did that happen?
You know, it seemed to kind of come out of the blue. My editor at Crooked Lane Books had said, you know, we sent the book off to a number of different places, and I just kind of forgot all about it because it just takes forever, and you know, most of them never materialized, and then suddenly, boop, there it was in the Times. That was great.
That's super exciting. I hope that pays off. I'm always curious how the newspaper reviews work because it's changed so much over the last couple of decades, but it changes every 6 months. So.
Completely. Yeah, absolutely.
So why don't you tell us about Midnight in Memphis? What's it about? No spoilers. Just give us a little bit to get us the gist of it.
Yeah. So it's a Southern noir mystery thriller that's set in Memphis in the 1950s, and it follows the story of 2 detectives. One is a kind of a white detective who has kind of a troubled past coming up out of the Delta. The other is a black policeman who's kind of almost assigned to him as a ball and chain punishment. And and this is the middle of Jim Crow in the South, they're assigned the task of trying to catch a killer who is reaping revenge for Memphis's history of lynchings that go back many decades. And so it sort of moves towards putting the entire city in a state of hysteria. So there's a kind of a race against time. Who's going to be the next victim, and why?
I mean, that sounds fantastic, and good summary, by the way. That's like a skill a lot of authors don't have. So well done, sir. So you're hitting a lot of big themes in this, right? So you've got this killer on the loose, but you're dealing with race in the South. What are some of the themes, and how did you handle them?
Well, you know, I started writing this novel really with an idea of how I wanted to end it, you know, just from a plot standpoint, and then I kind of wrote towards that. And I set it in Memphis because I thought Memphis was a really fascinating place in the mid-50s, in mid-century Memphis, and in mid-century South was a really fascinating place. A lot of changes were happening all at once. In Memphis in particular, they had a sort of a political machine, kind of, you know, authoritarian dictatorship that had been reigning over the city for decades that was starting to crumble. It was the beginning of the kind of nascent civil rights movement. And that was in its ascendancy. And at that same time, there was this confluence of all of these cultural influences, musical influences that came together in Memphis and kind of created then something entirely new that we're all quite familiar with, called rock and roll. So that was the sort of the milieu, and so I started writing it really kind of knowing where I wanted to be and knowing where I wanted to go, and the rest of it was a very organic, creative process.
You mentioned that your family was fighting against the political machine, then you became part of it. Explain.
Well, then they became part of it. So you had this democratic political, kind of dictatorship. It was called the Boss Crump machine that had really reigned in Memphis. It was run by this guy, Edward Hale Crump, who just controlled all the elections, controlled everybody who held public office, going back 40 years. And so he had died in 1954, and suddenly everything was in motion. There was a power grab happening, lots of changes. In the meantime, you had a group of young people, the GIs who came back after having fought fascism in Europe. They come back to their own fascism at home, and they just didn't really like it. So my parents were part of this group. They joined this thing called the New Republicans because, the dictatorship was a democratic dictatorship. So they became Republicans, and they fought for the idea of a two-party system being the best system of government, where you had a balance between the parties and voters could vote for who they wanted and not just have their votes count for nothing. They were successful, and over time what happened was the pendulum swung back the other way, and Tennessee became a red state, and they kind of became part of the ruling party that dominated everything. So it's kind of an irony about that.
What positions did they hold?
Well, my dad was chairman of the Democratic Party for Shelby County, which basically kind of where Shelby County went, the state of Tennessee would go. This was back in 68, 69, 70. And my mother was very active in Republican politics. She was a delegate to the Republican convention in San Francisco. She used to say, "Barry Goldwater is my hero." So she was Goldwater through and through, but over time she evolved and she ended up voting for Obama twice. So people change.
So I'm always curious because you're so entrenched with this culture. Is it just like when you have like this, you call it the democratic dictatorship, when you just have, is it just a quest for power? And if it is that something that's like ingrained in us, like in evolution, to like control the tribe so that you're not cast out into the wilderness, or is it something to like just better your like find with something that brings financial benefits? Because it always seems to me that people could just do better in the private sector if they were looking for money with all that work they're putting into.
Yeah, no, I mean I think power is a huge part of it, but it's a two-sided coin. I've always sort of viewed autocracies, and it's kind of what we're experiencing today is it's a Faustian bargain. People say, okay, I will give all this power to you, and then you will get all these things done that I want you to do.
Right.
And if you're in the beneficiary class of that, it's great. If you're not, it's not great. So, does that answer your question?
It does. I mean,
Okay.
in principle matters, right?
Yeah.
Whether you're benefiting or not. So,
but power is a thing that is like it's like a drug, and if people can get it, they will take it.
So is this the politics of the time? Is this a backdrop for your story, or does it play an integral part in the forwarding of the plot?
It's an integral part of it because there's a power grab that's going on. There's a whole sort of desperate search that's going on for this huge stash of cash that's enough to control the city that had been accumulated by Boss Crump before he died, and no one knows where it is. So that's an integral part of the story, absolutely.
And how do you deal with the race issue? With a 20-25 audience reading this, how do you they're gonna look at things through a different lens. How is it that you approach that in your book?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a number of different African American characters in the book. I have two main characters. One is the white detective that I talked about. The other was this black sort of token black cop that gets pulled into the homicide group and chasing this killer. And this character's name is Eustace Johnson. And I tried to create a character who. Where Burdette, his partner, is someone who is kind of like damaged from youth. Eustace is someone who's almost exemplary and but has his own kind of vendetta that he's pursuing. And in this kind of, pre-civil rights era, the way that he functioned was by indirection and misdirection and putting on a face so that nobody really knew what his agenda was while he pursued his agenda. And he's very effective at manipulating whites to be able to advance his own form of justice.
Now, it's such an interesting character. When you're creating these characters, are you basing them off of anybody real, or are you making them out of whole cloth?
People have asked me that, and I've kind of gone back and think, who do I know? No, I just invented them. And in Eustace's case in particular, I started off with a scrap of a character, and he just grew on me and grew on me and grew on me until, he became, one side of the coin, that was the entire book. If you go through the book, it alternates chapters telling the story from his point of view and from Burdett's point of view. So that was, when I talk about an organic process, that's one that really kind of crept up on me, and suddenly it was like there, and I just kind of embraced it.
So he grows through the writing as you're getting to know the character, but at the very beginning, how much of the character do you know when you start? Like when you're like, okay, I've got to I know this ending of this story, I have to populate it with characters. We have a lot of writers who listen to this, so like what is that process like for you, the actual character creation?
Well, the way with Eustace, the way I kind of peel the onion on him is very, very slowly at first, because he is basically opaque. He's putting out a face to all of his white colleagues on the police force, and not telling anything about what he's really thinking. But as soon as you jump into the chapters where it's told from his point of view, now you know his inner thoughts. Now you know what his goals really are that are not known to anyone else.
Your names are great in these. How important is that to give the flavor of the book when you're naming these characters, and how do you go about doing that? I'm gonna ask you a lot of these. How do you go about doing that questions, because people are interested in that.
These are good. So so I you cast around for names. I was looking for names that sounded very Southern to start with, and names that also kind of lent themselves to nicknames. It didn't sound like any other character I'd ever read about. And so that's kind of what I started with. Although at the time when I named one of my principal characters Burdett Vance, I didn't realize that Vance would become such a well-known name, but yeah.
So when you're looking around for these names, are you just doing it in other literature? Are you doing it in people in the phone books? I mean, how are you actually coming up with the names? The Social Security Administration database, because they have to be right for the right period of time as well.
I don't know where Burdett came from. I just kind of almost made it up. I don't think I ever got it out of any phone book. I can tell you where Eustace came from, because I had this old cousin. He was like a 90-year-old cousin named Eustace Sims, who was like one of the fathers of brain surgery down in Memphis, and I just always thought that was just such a very cool name, and very old-fashioned too.
And so these characters are super interesting, and they're different, and they're named differently. How do they develop, and how do you plan out the arcs, because you're getting to know them at as you write? How much of that and how much change do these major characters have to have, and when do you know what that change is as a writer?
Gosh, it's as you kind of progress through the arc between in the plot between Burdett and Eustace is one of kind of profound distrust and resentment that as they kind of bond over trying to solve this really horrendous murder before more people are killed, there's a bond that sort of starts to develop between them, and it doesn't really become kind of cast in concrete until really the very end. And by the end, they are really joined hip to hip.
But in the individual character arcs, like within each character, there's change, I assume, right from the beginning to the end. So how did you come up with that? When did you come up with that? And then how do you marry that to the plot so they work off of each other?
So with Burdett, I always envision him as being someone who was wearing blinders. You know, he was. It's there's a point in the book where I talk about he's someone who saw everything 20/20 at a distance, but up close it was a blur, and that kind of had to do with his sort of inability to decipher, you know, with the same level of acuity, the relationships that were really close to him, and that was his Achilles heel. And so part of the, I guess, the progression of the plot and I don't know if I want to say anything more.
No spoilers. People want to read it.
Yes, it comes to its fruition.
Oh, good. And people can read it if they want to figure out how.
Yeah.
So you mentioned with your plot, you had the ending and you sort of developed the plot as you went along, like, how am I going to get there? Do you, based on did you go to, was it Stanford where you studied writing? So did you use like a 4-act structure, or what, did you have a structure in your mind when you were trying to figure out how to get to this ending?
Yeah, I mean, it was really, I mean, this is my first novel, so I don't really consider myself to be as sophisticated as having all of those kinds of structures that you just talked about. But it was, I really had it in my mind to sort of build a whole story that was driving towards a certain kind of justice and reckoning that at the end, you suddenly have to reinterpret everything that you've read. That was, you know, in its kind of most general sense, that was what I was really looking to achieve.
Well, I mean, that is sort of a classic structure, right? And I mean, so it's the way people hear a story. You know, you have your beginning, your middle, and your end. You have the change that you want. You have things changing from the beginning to the end. It's really interesting.
Well, and you go back and you read it a second time, and you see all the hints that were laid, and so suddenly it becomes painfully obvious. And why didn't you figure that out? Yeah.
So how many of those hints did you put in during editing or after you finished the first draft, and how many were organic as you were writing through?
It's a good question. I would say it's probably half and half. You know, there was definitely a discipline of going back and laying breadcrumbs here and there, and going back and then taking them out. You know, because there's always this kind of balancing that you have to do as you kind of read through it again. You think, oh, you know, you've told too much, or you haven't really kind of been fair enough to the reader to, you know, give them some kind of hint of what might come. There's this balance between kind of fairness and surprise in these kinds of plots, and so that was something that required some combing through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't remember who said it, but the writer said it has to be surprising yet inevitable.
Yes, that's exactly
Right.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So your setting, I mean, it's really cool. You don't see a lot of books in Memphis, and it's got so much character. And you mentioned the music and the political situation that was going on. To what extent is that actual setting character in your book? Like, how much does it stand out?
Oh, hugely. I mean, it's the, you know, there are a lot of themes that work its way through at a kind of at different levels in the book. And, you know, one of the themes really relates to, you know, Memphis in some ways having been a center for some of what were the original sins in this country. You know, it starts with, I mean, there's one theme that finds its way all through the book that talks about indigenous people and what's left of them and all the kind of mounds up and down the Mississippi River that they built, and that becomes kind of an integral part of the plot. And, you know, then Memphis was the, you know, major point of embarkation for the Trail of Tears. You know, you go down Jackson Avenue in Memphis, and that leads you all the way down. That's where the Trail of Tears came into Memphis, all the way down to the waterfront where people were put on boats to nowhere. So there's that. Then Memphis became a really significant center for the slave trade back in the you know, before the Civil War, because what was happening was a lot of the slave states that were a little further north were shipping their people south and to be sold in Memphis, and so, you know, they had there was a slave market, so if you want to call it that was right next to the courthouse in Memphis. So there's a long history of stuff like that moving through Memphis, and I wanted that to be kind of part of the backdrop that kind of laid the foundation for the sense of outrage that would cause someone to be doing racial revenge murders in Memphis.
And does the change within the city, the change in that kind of dramatic time period when everything was changing, does that mirror your protagonist change in any way in the story?
You know, it's because I envisioned this as being part of a trilogy. It's kind of the beginning of that. You know, I'm actually writing the prequel to it right now, which deals with a bunch of other issues that kind of, it's all a throughput to where I really kind of see myself, you know, ending this kind of series, you know, well into the 60s. And over that period of time, you know, Memphis changed a lot, you know, and some of the ways that it's changed, it's still dealing with.
So I'm always interested, like, you know, how people develop story and how it comes to them. So initially you had the ending, and then you were driving towards that, but that was the ending of this book. At what point did you look at this as a trilogy and realize there had to be a broader, longer arc?
You know, I think it was, as much as anything, feeling like the more I learned, this is a historical novel. I did a lot of research, a ton of research for it. I know more about Memphis now than I ever knew from growing up there. And the more I learned about it, the more I realized there's kind of a, you know, it's like a before and after event in Memphis, and it's really the assassination of Martin Luther King. And I was writing about the period leading up to that. And so it was like feeling like the story needed to kind of keep going closer to that moment.
And is the prequel part of it, or the prequel's outside the trilogy?
Well, the prequel's part of it. It's
okay.
The same characters. Yeah, it's dealing with you know, another issue that seems very current these days, which is human trafficking.
And do you, this is not light reading, is it?
You know, it's fun reading. Everybody who's read it said it was really fun to read, but what's fun for me is layering in these kind of deeper messages into a propulsive story.
I think the reason people like reading is because your writing's really good. So it's your writing's very literary, yet it's in a mystery, and it seems like you keep the pacing going. You certainly do it with some chapter endings, and so how do you balance that when you're working on, like, you know, like a poetic prose and creating feeling and atmosphere, but also trying to keep the pace going? How did you work with that?
That's a big thing. You know, there were a lot of times where I would write something that I just, oh, this paragraph is just so good. I love this paragraph. And then I realized that I was just kind of getting off on a tangent that was just taking away from the pace of everything. One of my favorite scenes that I left in all the way up until the point where my editor was, she was a very light 10 on this. The one thing she said that has to go out was one of my favorite scenes that I really liked. And I've saved that scene. I'm going to use that scene somewhere else, but I took it out of the book. Yeah.
That's the lie we all tell each other, right? Yeah. It allows you to kill your darlings, right, when you do that.
Yeah,
but they're absolutely right, I think,
right.
in the end. But I do the same. I've actually used one scene in one book. I did put it in another book because I liked it so much.
Okay, there's hope.
There is hope, yeah. It might actually happen. So when you were studying writing, how much did that affect the writing in this book? Like, how much between the theory and the practice? Like, did you feel like they were very different animals?
You know, it's not like I went to a master's program in creative writing or anything. I mean, it's something I've always really loved to do. I'm a big reader, and it probably informs my writing more than anything else. And so, yeah, I think that's probably it. Is I read a lot. I love to tell stories. I mean, the reason, probably a big impetus for writing this was people have been telling me all my life, hey, Tom, you love telling stories, you got to write something. And finally I said, okay, I'm tired of hearing this, I'm going to do it. So,
do you think that storytelling is something that's innate in you? Are you born with it, or is it something that you develop over time?
I think that it's something that comes maybe from having grown up in the South. I mean, it really is part of the ethos down there. You know, this whole thing of Gothic storytelling, the tall tale. I mean, it's like it's there, and it's not just there, but it has a kind of a status. People, you know, love it and respect it down there. So yeah.
So I mean, going back to when you first were sort of enamored with story. Was it an oral storytelling tradition?
Oh yeah,
Or was
it was oral storytelling. Yeah.
And what was the first book that you remember that excited you when you were younger?
You know, it would have to be Lad a Dog by Albert Payson Terhune. That was like my favorite childhood book.
And the reason I ask that is because a lot of authors have this moment when they're younger, when they're like, oh, I want to do this, or I can do this, or it opens these worlds for people. When did that happen for you? When did you say, I would like to write? Was this something recent? Or
no, it's much more recent. You know, it's within the last, really 15 years that I decided I really wanted to go at this hard.
I mean, you've had a really interesting career. You've done a lot of different things. This work as a public defender in D.C., how did that influence your book here? Because obviously there's some similarity, right? But they're different systems of justice.
Yeah. I mean, I think the experience bred a certain kind of cynicism in me that carries through into, like, specifically my character Burdette. I mean, I did this for years going through law school, and I had a hard time finding a defendant that I was working for who was innocent. I mean, it's like you believe in everybody's right to, a good defense and all that, but the thing that I was seeing as I was going through law school and hadn't really gotten out into practicing law yet, but I was working with a lot of young Turks that had just kind of hit the public defender. And you could see the change happening to them over time. They were becoming kind of more cynical, more into the game playing of the system. With the ultimate goal of providing you the best defense possible. But I started thinking about, what do you want your life's work to be? And one of my philosophies is that you are what you eat, and that includes the diet of humanity that you surround yourself with. And I just thought that I would rather surround myself with a different diet of humanity.
Did you find that you were taking work home with you? Was it affecting your psyche when you weren't there defending people?
I don't know. It's like when I was doing this, I was in law school. I was working as an investigator. I'd going out and trying to interview people in projects at midnight. In Southeast D.C. I think the only thing I really had going for me is my hair was down to my shoulders, and I had these Neil Young sideburns, and I was wearing this big leather jacket, and everyone thought I was an undercover cop. That was my insurance. So that it's like I didn't have the room in my life for much contemplation. I was like trying to get through law school and do that too.
So did that experience help you when you're researching this book? When you're in Memphis, did you talk to the police down there? Did you talk to prosecutors or defense attorneys?
Not really, because if you read the book, the story doesn't really get into the legal system much. I mean, there's no courtroom scenes in it. There wasn't really that kind of need to do that. But the investigative part was really just very kind of narrowly focused on the story. Investigative techniques back in the 50s are different now. You don't get. It's like one of the really interesting things about reading novels. Crime novels today is you've got all this science that you can kind of bring to bear. DNA and all these things that are just so interesting. But there's another part of it that kind of takes away from just the flow of the story sometimes. And one of the interesting things about the 50s was a lot of that didn't exist back then. So you could really focus on things that were more just, part of the progression of the story.
Do you think it's easier writing crime fiction in that era?
Yeah, I think probably. Yeah. I mean, you have to do a lot more research around what that era was like. Maybe, but it felt easier to me.
So where did you do your research?
Good question. I did a bunch of it in Memphis. You should see the library of books that I have. About just the history of indigenous peoples in the Mississippi River Valley, history of Boss Crump and his whole political machine, and there's I've read a ton of history of this place, going back to its early antecedents.
Did you do the research before you started writing, or was it simultaneous?
It was simultaneous. Yeah.
And how long did it take you to write this book? Let's say to get a first draft done.
Okay. So I was just joking with Mike Sheen over here, my close friend. He's asked me that same question, and I said that so in man years, it probably took me 3 or 4 years to write this. In my kind of recollection, in calendar years, it was about 10 years. But then when I asked my wife, she says it's more like 2 dog years. So it was like I was working, I was doing all these other things, and so there would be whole spans of time that I would just have to put it down.
So if anybody's watching this at home right now, they can get out their calculators and try to figure out the answer to that question. So, did you enjoy the process of writing? It's obviously very difficult. It went for a long time. You were doing other things. Did you actually like writing?
It's really interesting. One of the great epiphanies I had was when I was working on my book, and it just suddenly hit me that I'm never happier than when I'm doing that. And it's like, boy, you just have to keep on coming back to that. It's like, that's talking to you about like where you're really happy and what your kind of highest and best use is in the world.
I think that really delineates writers from those who talk about writing. I see that all the time. Like if you don't feel good if you're not writing, you're a writer. If you're enjoying the writing and you're looking forward to getting back to it, you're a writer. If you're just talking about it or dreading or complaining about how hard it is or getting started or something, you're probably not.
Yeah. I think it's like, this is kind of like almost a cliche, but it's the journey, not the destination, right? You have to really enjoy the journey, because I can tell you based on personal experience that the destination, there's no pot of gold at the end of this rainbow. It's really just the satisfaction you get out of having done something that you can really, really proud of.
Well, that's its own form of pot of gold, right? And so what did that feel like? This is your debut. You worked on this thing for years. It's incredibly difficult. By the way, you're in a very small minority of people who actually get a book published, right? It's very difficult to get a book traditionally published. So once you did that and you get the box of books and it shows up at the house, how did that feel to hold that thing in your hands?
Oh. So I was at the house. I get this text. UPS has just dropped a box off on your front doorstep from Penguin Random House. And I knew, of course, what it was, And so I left it there. I got all of my chores done. I got everything just cleaned up just perfectly. I went and I fixed myself a drink. And I went out and I got that box and opened it up. And just holding that book in my hand was like, it almost brought tears to my eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people understand how much work and effort goes in and how personal it is too. So when you're writing a book like this, you're putting so much of yourself into it. Do you feel like that? Was there any trepidation, like having that inner story that you've been living with for so many years now out in the public where strangers are reading it?
I don't know. I'm probably more of an open book kind of person to start with. So maybe I would be worried about that less than maybe somebody else who's more private. But I'm just I love just getting it out there, and it's been really fun to see the response. It's connected me with so many people that I haven't seen in years and years and years, and that alone is like the payoff right there.
So I'm curious, so you decide you want to write the book, you start writing it. Did you tell anybody when you started writing, or were you sort of doing it in private?
Well, I told one person. That's Melissa, my wife, who's way down there.
And what did she say?
She said, this is like what you were born to do. Do it. And whenever I would be moping around the house, complaining, she'd say, stop complaining, go work on your book. And that's what she did for years and years and years. And, when you have somebody who's kind of pushing you forward in a really supportive way like that, it really makes all the difference.
Oh, it's huge to have somebody in your corner like that. I've
Yeah.
talked to a lot of writers who had the exact opposite, where people just trying to get them to stop what they were doing, you know?
Oh,
And
how
it's-
painful.
Yeah,
Painful.
incredibly
Yeah.
painful, but they had that drive to do it, and then when it's successful, it's sort of, you know, it's...
Well,
it's,
then you can say, I told you so, but I'd rather not have to say, I told you so. Yeah.
So how did you teach yourself to write? Because, I mean, you've been writing, obviously, different types of things your whole
Right.
career, but this is very different. What did you do? Did you take other classes? Did you read books on craft? What was your process there?
Gosh, you know, I've read a lot of books about writing novels, and books on craft. I've got multiple thesauruses. The thesaurus of sensuality. There's one for you.
Tell us more about that, Tom.
And so, but yeah, I mean, it's a solitary thing for me. It's just working to try to get to be a better writer and to write something and rewrite it until I felt like it was just right.
And you had a lot of options, right? A lot of people jump to self-publishing. There's hybrids out there. What made you decide to go traditional at the beginning?
Well, you have to define where the beginning is. So I'd finished the novel-ish, and that was, I can't tell you how many drafts I did of the novel after I finished the novel. But I finished it, and I just decided I wanted to try to go the traditional route, which just says, you got to go out and you got to find an agent. So, I'm an organized professional person, and I developed a spreadsheet, and I had multiple databases I was using to identify agents who I thought might be a good fit. And I queried scores of agents. I had 4 agents who said, send me the manuscript. All of them came back saying, really great, really well written, don't think I can sell it. And it was really not much more than a year ago, I saw this book deal that got done by an editor at Crooked Lane Books, and I looked to see who the agent was on it, thinking I'd reach out to them, and there wasn't an agent. So I looked at Crooked Lane Books' website, and I reached out to them and sent them a query letter, and then just completely forgot about it. It's the only time I ever reached out to a publisher. And just a little before Christmas last year, I was talking to my wife, saying, I got this feeling, I got this lucky feeling like something good is about to happen. And like the next day, I get this email from Crooked Lane, the same editor. Her name is Marcia Markland. She's terrific. And she said, I'm interested in your book. Send me the manuscript. I sent her the manuscript. I'd done that before, and it came to nothing. So I forgot all about it. Went through the holidays, and then right after the first of the year, she said, well, we're thinking about making you an offer, but first of all, what's your marketing plan? Where's your website? What's your social media? Who's your publicist? And I just kind of shook my head and thought, well, that's the end of that. And then 2 days later, she called me up and she said, the publisher has read your book, wants to make an offer immediately, bypass the committee, here's the offer. And I looked at the offer, and it was pretty much what I was expecting as a debut author. And I forwarded that offer to the 4 agents who had turned me down and said, okay, you said I couldn't sell the book. I sold the book. Who wants to be my agent? And within an hour, I had an agent. So that's how it all happened for me. And it was kind of like a ass-backwards process.
But people do that, and that is the way to go
Yeah.
get an agent for sure. Did you think about reaching out to other agents who hadn't turned you down or hadn't responded yet?
By then, I'd gone through scores and scores. And by the way, John Talbot, my agent, he's terrific. It's like if I was choosing him off a list, he would be one of the top people I would choose. So I was totally thrilled that he wanted to represent me.
You might be the 6th author I've interviewed who's been represented by him at one point.
Oh, okay. I hope they're all happy.
So what is that call like when you get this, right? Because that's a big deal. We're bypassing the committee, because the committees is when you get people from sales and marketing in there who want to shoot things down, and the naysayers, right? So that's a big deal. Having
The
a publisher
easiest thing
saying
to
we're
do
doing
in a
it.
committee is to go thumbs down on somebody.
Yeah, it's a safe thing, because you take a chance on something, and if you're the one to speak out for it and it doesn't do great, who do they blame?
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of felt like I dodged a bullet with that, and especially if it was the publisher who was like saying, we're going to do this deal. So So I told my agent, told John, let's give them whatever they want on the contract, but we're going to hold on to the film rights. That was the one thing I told him, because I'd been told by a lot of different people that they thought this was very cinematic, and so I thought, what the heck.
What did your wife say when you told her? I assume that's the first person you told.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah, she was totally thrilled. Yeah. She's been riding this wave with me. It's just great.
So what was like the most surprising thing for your debut book that you went into, maybe in the business or in the writing, that was something that you just were shocked about in going through this?
I would say, it's just the education I've had on the whole publishing market is that the thing that I learned, from reaching out to all these agents and just the things that I'd read is it's really, the market is largely, the vast majority of novels are bought by women. And so the vast majority of agents seem to be women who are looking for cozy mysteries and book club fiction and things like that, which is not what I hadn't written towards that market. And female protagonists. This. It's like there's a definite demand even among male authors to write female protagonists, and that's not something that I had even been aware of when I was writing the novel. So that was the biggest surprise for me, is that that's where the market was.
What was the hardest part in the actual writing of the novel?
Gosh. I would say, it's like the writing of it, I get back to it. That was the fun part for me. It was the part that I just loved when I was doing it. And every time I would stop doing it and then go back to doing it, I'd be asking myself, and why did you stop working on this novel? Because this is really fun. So, but I would say by far the hardest thing, though, is the flip side of what I just described, time management. Every writer you talk to, it's like time management is the most difficult thing. And and that is, and given the number of other things I've got going on in my life, I'm running a company, I'm sitting on boards and stuff, time management is a big thing.
So because we have so many writers listening to this, I got to go through some quick process questions for you. Then I'm going to go to the audience for questions. So if you have questions, think of them now. I'll be coming around with a microphone. You outlined a little bit, but once you got through, you knew where you were going. Did you then outline before you started writing?
No, I never did. Now, here's the thing, is now that I'm writing the second novel, and all these characters are created, and I'm writing into a much more of a structured kind of character situation, it's a completely different challenge, and I'm having to absolutely be much more structural and disciplined about that.
You'll find with every book there's some new big challenge. It never gets easier. Okay. Yeah, they're just the challenges change, right? Yeah. So, did you write at this? You mentioned time management. Was it the same time, same place? When did you find the time to carve out for this?
So, on my calendar, I have blocked out from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. every single morning to write. Now, ask me how many times I actually write during that 6 to 10 a.m. It's like I go for periods where I'm just really busy on a lot of other things. Right now I have to tell you the thing that is like driving me crazy, and I'm really looking for this tonight is sort of like the beginning of my pause, my holiday pause, when I don't have anything else going. I don't have to be doing anything. I'm trying to kind of push Midnight in Memphis out, when I really just want to dive into, the second novel and really kind of make progress on it. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah. When you took these breaks, or work or life kind of consumed your time, did you find it harder to break back into it when you came back to the writing?
Yeah, sometimes it's like you have to find a chunk of time at that point to just block everything out. Put on your earpods. I would. When I was writing, it's like I put on like a lot of kind of blues and kind of early R&B music that's like from the period that I'm writing about. It's music, there's like a silent soundtrack that works its way all the way through this novel. And so music is a really big part of it. And so I wanted to have that kind of going through my head as I was writing.
And will you do that for each of these books? Or music that's, as you move into the 60s, will you change the music you're listening to?
The music is evolving even in this book. Yeah.
That's very cool. And did you write, when you this 4-hour block, do you write to a word count or a page count, or do you just write for as long?
So for a while I was hitting like 1,000 words a day. I think that's a really good pace to do. Every now and then you do more, some less, but and that's I think that's a pretty good one for me.
And do you write on the computer? If so,
all the time on the computer. It's like I can't stand the snail pace of hitting my hand. My handwriting's not good enough and not fast enough.
I really understand that. I can't read my handwriting 10 minutes later. So do you write in Scrivener or Word, or what tools did you use?
Yeah, just Microsoft Word.
And did you use any editing tools or other kinds of software?
No. Yeah. What are there good editing tools and other kinds of software?
There's a ton of them. Yeah.
All right, you and I'll talk.
I'd be happy to go through that with you. There's a whole bunch of them that are really fun. All right. So I just wanted to ask you, like, how long when you sit down does it take for that creative muscle to start bringing the story to you? And do you do anything to put yourself in that creative mindset, or you're just like, hey, it's 6 o'clock, I'm at the keyboard, let me just start writing?
I think the most effective thing for me is to go back over what I've written recently, and just to, read that, and then that really gets you back into it. And you read it, and you're rewriting it as you're reading it too. So it's like an active, creative process.
And one question I do ask everybody is where do you think story comes from? These things kind of come out of the ether, and I get some really interesting answers to this. But where did this story come from? Do you remember where the germ of the idea came from, or how these characters developed?
I don't know. That was like 2 dog years ago that I first thought this up. So I think that there have been stories that I've read that were like really just kind of rocked my world when I got to the end of it and just realized, oh my God, there's like just this convulsive flip of the whole thing. And that was the challenge that I really wanted to try to do with this. But it wasn't anything more specific than that, and the time and the place. It's a really fertile place for telling stories.
And it's different too. I think that'll really work to your advantage for sales. All right, I'm going to come around. Raise your hand if you have a question. I'll put the mic up close to you. I'll hold it, and so it can come out on the podcast.
All right.
And you just stay here and feel free to answer. Any questions over here on this side? Anybody? Over here? Oh, there we go. Let me come around.
I was curious about why you went and got an agent after you had already gotten a publisher, because for most people that's what you're trying to do is get the publisher, and then you can work with a publisher. What did the agent do for you that you felt you couldn't do for yourself?
Yeah, I think my judgment around wanting to have an agent after I already, I hadn't signed the contract yet, so there was some kind of thought of like it would be good to have some kind of like market validation about what the terms were, and he was helpful on doing that. But I really wanted to get an agent involved because I wanted the relationship long term. It's just like it's so hard to get an agent. But if you can get one, and it's a long-term relationship, that's a dividend that, because I'm a lawyer, I've negotiated contracts, I could probably go to ChatGPT and they'd tell me all the market terms on what a debut author's contract should look like. That's not really, there's not probably that much rocket science around it, but it was the relationship that really was the thing. And I got a really great relationship.
Good question. Here we go.
Tom, this is really, really, really great, and I've just started the book. It's so awesome. You're such a good writer. It's wonderful to read it. You stepped on the third rail to say you're going to write about a racial crime. But as I'm hearing you talk about the characters, and I've only just started the book, it's sort of this question about where's the crime, because it almost feels like each of the 2 detectives has committed a crime by not owning up to whatever issues or things they brought to this racial crime and to their own lives as it relates to this issue of race. And so I know when you started writing this book, it was a big challenge to think about, could you take on the role of a black writer? But is there more than one crime in this book? As part of the crime, the characters and the way they face this kind of injustice?
It's really hard for me to answer that question without giving anything away. But just to more broadly address what you're talking about, I mean, there's a school of thought that, somebody like me shouldn't be getting in the head writing an African American character. It's like social, it's like cultural appropriation. And I think people are entitled to think that way, but it's not really the way I was thinking about it. I mean, I was writing about human beings dealing with what was the reality of the world at that time. So that was what it was about to me.
All right, last chance for question.
I was wondering whether you, in the course of writing the book and researching it, whether you learned anything more about your own personal or family history, or had a revelation about something in your own family history.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, my family. There's a lot of family history in Memphis. I think I suspect that for the next novel that I'm writing, which is a prequel to this, that it probably is maybe a little closer. But a lot of it was just like this is the world I grew up in, and kind of what I was told by my family and all the family friends, and these were all people who were all part of this kind of power structure that I just kind of grew up going to school with their kids. And so does that answer your question, or
Any other questions over here?
Hi. So I know writing about historical fiction, there's always going to be that foot in reality. My question is really, how did you navigate that, especially about writing about Boss Crump? And I just loved how music was really the header of every chapter. It really felt like that through line. But I know that comes with its own issues with artists in their own right. So I just was wondering how you navigated that.
Well, those are kind of two questions. Yes. So the first one really talks about is about if you're writing something that's a historical novel and you kind of got real facts that you have to deal with, and it's like I'm already getting comments back from people who have read the book saying, that radio station wasn't WROX, it was KROX. It's like, oh yeah, okay, second printing. So people are very discerning about historical accuracy, and I had to work, I think, pretty hard to try to get it right. I think I'm pretty close. On the music side of things, the big challenge was, it's like I've read a lot of books that were kind of about kind of music in Memphis and music in the South. And one of the things you'll notice about those books is that almost none of them really quote any of the lyrics. There's a reason for that, and it's called copyright law. And, I love the idea of having these lyrics at the beginning of every chapter that kind of like somehow relates to something in the chapter or in the book more broadly writ. And, but I realized as I was trying to get myself organized around this and trying to think about the copyright issues that there was a really simple answer to it, and that was, since I was dealing with mostly old blues songs, I basically went back to the whole oeuvre of blues songs that predate 1930, which is basically, 80% of blues songs, it felt like. I mean, there's just a huge body of work there. And worked with those because I know they're all in public domain. And so I didn't have to deal with any copyright issues. And then for songs that were more modern, because I kind of divided between my two characters, one old blues, the other kind of more early R&B and rock and roll, I realized I would never be able to get permission, or it would just be too much brain damage for me to do it. And so I just made up lyrics and made up groups, and they all sounded like people that we know. So
That must have been fun.
it was, yeah.
Tom, a quick question on your trilogy. So the timeline for this book, do you think you'll be able to accelerate the timeline on the 2 books on either side of it? Because
God.
I've gotten to work with you for a while, and I've always known you've been a great writer. I didn't know you were doing this, and I think it's wonderful. But I'm wondering if you've thought about that part, if you'll be able to, having the success of getting this one done, work on that timeline.
Yeah. So, my original thought was I'd finish this book and and it all takes place over like 7 days in 1955. It's like a really collapsed, or most of it does, really collapsed time period. And then I was thinking I'd write a sequel, and I actually started it, and the sequel actually, and I'm still going to do it, but I diverted myself to doing a prequel for a reason I'll tell you in a minute. But the sequel was starting exactly where the first novel ended. So it was just like the next day kind of thing. And then I was looking back, I was kind of trying to organize my head around the backstories of my principal characters, and I realized, there's a whole novel there that I could write about this. And so I decided at that point and it's a really fascinating set of historical issues and social issues. As I said, I'm kind of centered around the idea of human trafficking of many different kinds for that prequel. And it's something that just felt like it was a gift to me to be able to have that whole structure kind of almost immediately.
And how many dog years will the prequel take you?
Well, the current dog that we have is really old. I don't know. It's like I have put a very soft, fuzzy, spongy stake in the ground with my editor to try to have something done in a year. So nobody's holding my feet to the fire, but she can't wait for it.
I love it. So you have books here for sale, correct?
I do.
Okay, so we'll set him up over here so you can come up, buy your book, get it signed. Where should people who are watching this podcast, where should they go to find your work?
Well, it's pretty much available all around. I mean, it's like Barnes and Noble, Amazon. Go to my webcast, and there's a whole page of independent bookstore partners there. Here locally, I can tell you there's a stack of signed copies waiting for you up at Wonderland Books in Bethesda if you want to go up there. It's available a lot of different places.
Well, congratulations on the book. It's really wonderful. So I wanted to just ask everyone 2 things. One, if you would just go on Amazon and rate his book. It only takes like 30 seconds, and it makes a big deal when people see a lot of ratings there. It tends to make them pull the trigger on buying an author they haven't read before. And also, if you like what we're doing with Elaine's Literary Salon, please go to elaine'sliterarysalon.com and sign up for our newsletter. And we would love it if you'd rate wherever you rate restaurants, on Google or OpenTable or wherever that is. Tom, this has been really fun. Thank you so much. Great job.
Thank you. Really, really enjoyed it.